Good evening, everybody. It is 9 o'clock Eastern Time on Saturday night. My name is Chris Weuve, and this is Starfleet Tactical, but you all knew that if you're here. So tonight I'm solo. I never did establish comms with Lissa, but I didn't follow the usual procedure. Usually at some point on Facebook, I say, hey, I'm having a show tonight. And so I think she didn't think to ask, and I didn't think to tell her. And so here I am by myself. But, you know, StreamYard's usually pretty reliable, so we'll see what ends up happening. Should be perfectly fine. But as always, I speak for myself, not my employer. I don't know that my employer has an opinion on tonight's subject, which is the Strategic Space Command Galactic Cruiser LEIF ERICSON, which for those of you who are approximately my age, you probably remember this, or maybe a little bit older, you remember this. This was originally a model kit from AMT designed by Matt Jeffries of Star Trek fame. So it seemed like the thing to do. So let's talk about the LEIF ERICSON. So let me bring up my slides. Okay. So like I said, that's the topic for tonight. A few announcements so I don't forget. Next week, I expect to do a show. Now, I am going to be doing a game during the day. So in part, that's contingent upon me getting my act together tomorrow morning and during the week and actually doing the episode for next week. I'm pretty sure that it's going to be what's first in the queue there, the Subway FTL system. And by that, I mean things like Alderson points and Starfire warp points and the FTL system used in Michael McCollum's Antares trilogy books, where you go to a set point in space near the system and it takes you to a very specific other system. Those are interesting in a lot of different ways. They have some interesting ramifications for offense and defense and the like. And so I want to talk about those. I think that's going to be the subject for next week. I've also added onto the list this idea of the Wild Side and Landis space drive list. Wild Side list is from the early days of the internet. The copy I have is dated like 1995 or something like that. It was an attempt to put together all the different space drives in science fiction. And so there's a lot of stuff there to mine, and I've been wanting to talk about it for a while. So in any event, I'll pick something off of that list. I'm on the Exordium read-along. I'm waiting. They're doing a third edition of the books. I'm waiting for those to come out, and then we'll do the Exordium read-along. Okay, back up to the schedule. So on the 7th of March, I will be in Cleveland, Ohio, actually Aurora, Ohio, for the Cleveland Concoction Science Fiction Convention. And so anybody who's there, track me down. If any of you are in the neighborhood and want to go, track me down. It's a small con. It's kind of trying to recover from COVID. It's not the best con I've been to, but it's a con that a bunch of friends of mine and it's got a lot of potential, and a bunch of friends of mine and I go to that con. So we've sort of made it the place where we get together each year. The following weekend, I don't know if I'm going to do a show, because on Sunday there's an open house. I'm helping set up with the open house. It's a couple I know that, in fact, if you go to science fiction conventions around here, you might know them, Chris Oakley and Jim Bell. Jim does a lot of science presentations. Chris runs a table in the dealer's room. She was a used bookseller for years and years and years. Jim recently had open heart surgery, and as a result, he is not authorized to do basically any work to prep for their annual open house. So I have volunteered to be acting Jim and go lift heavy things and other things, and I don't know whether that's going to be just a morning of job or a 2-day job. So I may or may not be available. On the 21st of March, I am definitely going to be at a birthday party that's going to be at 6 o'clock in the evening. There is some chance that we may just try to do a show from Brian Haven's living room and just sort of have a meetup type show. I'm expecting that we won't do that, because that requires too much organization on what's going to be an inherently chaotic day. So I'm expecting that the answer is that there won't be a show then. And then on the 28th of March, I expect that there will be a show. Okay. So as usual, I am going to show you a bunch of images. Those images I've picked because I think they're interesting, and there will be I picked them for educational purposes and for purposes of critiquing those images. And so that's why I'm using them under fair use restrictions. In some cases, the people who put together the things may still be living. They do not know that I'm even doing this. And so, nothing I say should reflect badly upon them. I don't really have anything negative to say about any of this stuff. I pick stuff because I'm a fan, right? I pick stuff because I'm a fan. But I'm not trying to steal anybody's images. I'm trying to critique them. And that's where we're going to go. Okay, let me turn off the banner because that'll just get in the way going forward. So, all right, here's the agenda. So this is another one of those getting in touch with your inner 12-year-old type episodes, right? Because a lot of us had this model. A lot of us remember this model. And this model's been in a lot of different versions of it, as it turns out. There was the original AMT model. There was several reissues of that. There was the glow-in-the-dark version. There was all sorts of stuff. And we're going to go through all that stuff. We're going to look at the various sources that you can find online. Talk a little bit about how this model actually came about. Talk a little bit about the in-universe background. Then we're going to sort of focus on some books for a while because this was used by Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven in Mote and God's Eye as sort of the template for one of the hero ship in that book. We're going to talk about some other books where it showed up on the cover and things like that. And then we're going to go look at some artwork done by Winchell Chung and some other people. And then finally, there's a few Star Trek variations on this. Not surprising since it's Matt Jeffries. So let's go ahead and get at it. Okay, so for sources, this ship is all over the web. Now, if you go to Atomic Rockets, Winch has several pages on this. One that sort of details all the models. He's got a model that has interior stuff. He's got links to everything, etc. Starship Modeler has a couple of editions of it because people have built the model and showcased it on Starship Modeler. There's all sorts of other stuff all over the web. But unfortunately, some of those links are now dead. You used to be able to buy blueprints of this ship. And those links are dead. In fact, even going through archive.org, I wasn't able to get the images, the high-res images of it. And there's just a lot of stuff that seems to be gone on this, which is really kind of unfortunate because it really is sort of a very canonical ship. Another source is the documentation that was included in the box. That's where the history comes from. And finally, Jerry Pournelle's book, A Step Farther Out, he's got a section called Building the Mote in God's Eye, where he talks about the various technical aspects of the universe and how they came about it. And he talks about the process whereby they looked at the model of the ship. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. Below, we have some illustrations that are actually from the ship. Now, one of the model makers, a guy named Merrill, and his stuff is gone. I haven't been able to find it. Although I don't think I looked on archive.org for him. I maybe need to go and try to do that. But he makes the claim that little illustration on the left is not quite accurate when you compare it to the actual model. You may recall we've seen that before, right? The blueprints for the original Enterprise do not match the actual model. That curving swoop in the secondary hull doesn't actually exist. In reality, it's just it's sort of a lopsided cone, which is really kind of interesting. But so, there's a long tradition of the drawings being vaguely good enough. Okay, so in the real world, it was designed by Matt Jeffries. Perhaps you're familiar with some of his other work. The Enterprise is the main thing that he's known for. But he also did the DY-100 from the episode Space Seed. Another ship with a conning tower on it, another spaceship with a conning tower. And he also did the Klingon D7, which I'm going to argue is there's some elements of the D7 in all this too. So you can sort of recognize his style. It was originally intended, there was going to be a set of 12 models about the Strategic Space Command. And the original book, or the original model, talked about how they were going to do 12 models, and they were all going to focus on the midshipman on board. And there was one particular midshipman that they were going to talk about him. There's a little short story that came along with it and stuff like that. And they were going to do this set of models, and then they didn't. And I don't know why they didn't. I don't know if it was poor sales. I don't know if there was just a change in direction. I don't know why they didn't do it, but they didn't. Hold on just a second. Let's see. My heater is doing a really good job. It's doing too good a job, so I need to turn it down. Okay, so they only produced the first model after saying they were going to do a bunch. And so a few other people, there's some stuff online where people have sort of like tried to fill in a few of the pieces here and there. I decided not to go down that route. And I specifically decided not to grab every model that somebody had done and tried to link to this. Because there's a lot of them, but there wasn't a whole lot of variability between them. And besides, just go to Atomic Rockets and look up Winchell Chung's page on it. He's got it all in meticulous detail. There's no reason for me to just replicate Winch's work here. I want to add some context. I want to add some critique to what I've seen, and I want to put my particular spin on it. But don't think that just because you listen to this that you've got the full story. You should go look at Winch's page. There's been a bunch of kits produced. The first one was produced in 1968. I was 3 years old. I did not buy it. In fact, I did not even know about the 1968 kit until I read Jerry Pournelle in A Step Farther Out talking about this kit and about how they later did it in this horrible glow-in-the-dark plastic. The UFO mystery ship, that's the one I have. And that one's been released at least twice. They released it again about 10 or 15 years ago as sort of a nostalgia edition. And so, and the other one's been released a bunch, and there's been a couple of different resin versions, and there's been various 3D printed versions that people have done, and there've been various upgrade kits, and you can buy photo etched parts to augment it, and you can buy resin parts to augment it. A lot of people are really into putting detail on the inside of the hangar bay and putting things in the engine cowlings. And so there's lots of stuff there for you to play with. There's just a bunch of stuff with regard to this. And I want to say that I think somebody even did it in game scale, like 1 inch or 2 inches long. They did it in game scale. But that may have been just something that I heard that a friend of mine did, pulling stuff off the internet. Okay, so here's some indication of what Matt Jeffries had done. Some of his original sketch work is on the right. You can sort of see where it came from. Early on, it had that funky nose cone. Early on, it sort of had the engine cowlings on the left and right, presumably engine cowlings. It had the wings, although the wings sort of varied in which direction they're going. Later, he redid the concept for the hyperspace carrier Pegasus. George Powell was in the 1970s, like 1975, he commissioned Matt Jeffries to do some preliminary work for some sort of War of the Worlds TV show that never ended up getting made. And I don't know anything about it, but I don't remember, I've read Wells. I don't remember a hyperspace carrier in it. Makes me wonder exactly what that is, or makes me wonder if it had anything whatsoever to do with the H.G. Wells story. I'll note George Powell is the guy who did the movie back in the 1950s. So you'd think that same title meant that it's somehow related to the Wells story or the 1950s movie or something like that, but I don't know what's going on there. So here's what a couple of the model kits look like. That I believe is the original version of both. So I think I had the glow in the dark one, and I think that's the original glow in the dark version. The later one is a little bit more day glow than that. Below that is a drawing for a resin model that Winch on the website says it's going to come out anytime now, but it's said that for a while. So I don't know if that kit ever came out. In my sort of casual searching, I never saw anything, but I thought this was an interesting design. It's clearly inspired by, you could easily view this as being the next generation. I looked at, there's more artwork on the website that you can go to and see it from different angles. And it didn't trip my trigger enough to go from different angles. But this gives you a pretty good idea of overall what it looks like. One thing I want you to think about is, ask yourself the question, where are the engines? Are they those boxy things on either side? If they are, do you really want your presumably high temperature exhaust going over your winglets? Are they the things on the wings, those little vents on the wings? That doesn't appear to be very much. There isn't anything in back. That I think is one of the things about this design, and as a result, all the artwork based on the design, that's a little bit of a problem, is that I don't see where it doesn't sort of pass the smell test when it comes to thinking about how does the propulsion work on that. So, okay, moving on. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this. Strategic Space Command, it's all set in the year 2075. It's the dominant force for a united Earth, or at least maybe not a united Earth, but it's the United Earth Force. Headquarters on Earth, directs all activities in space. And they've divided space into sectors. Each sector is assigned a Galactic Expeditionary Force. And the Galactic Expeditionary Force goes and does trade and exploration and establishes colonies and all the rest. And you've got all sorts of military ships, but each Galactic Expeditionary Force has a Ranger Squadron composed of 4 Galactic cruisers, modified from the Explorer class. So presumably this is a modified Explorer class because the LEIF Ericson is this type of ship, and it's one of the 4 ships in that squadron. It can have 2 fighter interceptor scout ships. Now, when you look at the hangar bay really only fits the 1 scout ship, which sort of implies that maybe there's a place where you can go stack another one, or maybe they come in and do sort of the alternating thing, one's facing forward, one's facing aft, but that doesn't leave you a whole lot of room to maneuver in there. It's not really clear how you get 2 in there with things being the size that they are. Sort of across the board, this model seems to have a few scale issues where you sort of wonder, like, okay, have they thought through the scale stuff? This says it's got 2 highly advanced ion drive engines, which of course harkens back to the days of Star Trek, the original Star Trek, where they thought that ions were these really, really powerful things that, the Enterprise, they had warp drive, but they didn't have ion drive because that's just way beyond them. And I don't know what was going on with people back then that they thought that was the case, but apparently ion drives were the thing. Everybody wanted to talk about their ion drives. So. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Mote and God's Eye. So Jerry Pournelle describes the entire process in this essay in A Step Farther Out, building the Mote and God's Eye. He had this model. They kind of on a lark decided, hey, let's go ahead and use this model. And what can the model tell us? So first of all, he says it's clearly intended to land on a planet. That's why you got the wings, that it's intended to land on a planet. And so we know it's not a battleship because a battleship wouldn't land on a planet. Okay, I guess not. But so they decided it was a battle cruiser. And I'll note that the implication is, because it's not that big a ship, the implication to me sort of is that he's got his own definition of what a battle cruiser is. And this is not unusual. A lot of people think a battle cruiser was a ship between the size of like a cruiser or heavy cruiser and a battleship. The World War I battle cruisers were bigger than their battleship contemporaries. The Invincible was bigger than the Dreadnought. It had less armor and less guns, but it had so many more engines that it actually was a little bit longer. And the displacement, I forget whether it displaced more, but it was actually physically bigger. And so I think, but as I've said in the past, everybody who talks about battle cruisers has their own idea about what a battle cruiser is. No two nations seem to think in terms of battle cruisers being the same thing. And you can also make the argument that individual nations were not terribly consistent about how they approach battle cruisers either. So with that being the case, it's not surprising that, Pournelle and Niven came up with their own definition, which is perfectly valid. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think it's valid. They decided that it would potentially scoop hydrogen from gas giants, and hey, look, it's got these two big scoops on the side, so that's what they view those as being fuel processing scoops. That also explains why it would have the winglets and everything else like that. And they also talked about it. I think the ship in the novel, if I remember correctly, rotates along its long axis to provide gravity. And he talks about how the conning tower would give you an area of higher gravity, which would potentially be useful. And that statement honestly doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Because if that is indeed what they're doing there, the highest gravity isn't going to be in the conning tower. The highest gravity is going to be in the whiskey bottle portion of it, right? So I don't know what the conning tower actually gives you in terms of gravity. And I also look at this ship and say, this is exactly the wrong ship to be rotating. It's not that big to be doing spin gravity that way. It wouldn't work. It just plain wouldn't work. And so that part I don't think quite makes sense, but hey, I'll give them an A for effort and for understanding that spin gravity is probably a useful thing. So Merle points out, I had this model and still have the shuttle. The big ship was structurally unsound for use by children. I had the shuttle way after I had the model. In fact, as a kid, I used to carry the shuttle around with me because it was my own little toy that I could play with. And I love that shuttle. And I maybe even still have it someplace. I haven't seen it in a long time. I want to say that there was somebody who did a resin kit of just the shuttle in a much bigger scale, which would be cool. I'd be really tempted to buy that. In fact, I should see if I can get somebody to 3D print something like that for me. I'm going to do questions for everybody else later. I just happened to see that one. Okay, so at one point there was going to be a Mote and God's Eye universe role-playing game that was going to be called The Empire of Man. And it was set in the Co-Dominion universe, and it sort of fell apart for my interpretation from just what I saw from the outside was that Jerry Pournelle's agent didn't understand role-playing games, and everybody involved didn't understand role-playing games, and the guy who bought the rights did not. He was an enthusiast who was going to do his own role-playing game, and more power to you, but I don't think he knew what he was getting himself into. So in the end, it never came out. It just never came out. But there was some artwork commissioned for it, and the credits for this artwork is on I think the next slide. It's on one of the other slides here. So it's on the landing slide. When we get to landing, the credit, I forgot to put the credits on this one. But they hired a professional artist who borrowed a mesh from somebody else, if I remember correctly. And so this is the shipyard building the ship thing, which is really pretty cool. I do wonder about the wooden boxes that are just sort of sitting there, not floating, not fastened, just sitting there. But but that's okay. Overall, I think I like the fact that it's a chaotic situation, because shipyards are kind of chaotic in that regard. But this doesn't, I'm not sure if this is exactly what I would think that this would look like. Like, for instance, I'm not convinced that those ships are tethered well enough to stay in place. But in any event, I like the artwork there. It's pretty good. Okay, let's take a look at some book covers. So on the right-hand side, we've got a Rick Sternbach for one of the copies of Mote and God's Eye. You see the red giant there, and you see a modified version of the MacArthur, a modified version of the LEIF ERICSON as the MacArthur, with a little bit less fin work. On the left-hand side, it's from a book called Rod Serling's Other Worlds, and hey, look at that, it's got engines. It's got engines, it's got little protrusions at the end of the winglets. It's got, in front of where the hangar bay would be, it's got something that is clearly modeled off of one of the facings of the landing gear box from a Space 1999 Eagle. So I think we all remember that there's been a bunch of book cover artwork that's basically people taking things we recognize and sort of kit bashing them together and doing fast book artwork. So this is clearly an example of that. I don't know who the artist for this is. My apologies. But I do like the fact that it's got engines, because, you know, hey, engines are a big deal. Couple of other versions of this. So the one on the left is just one I found online. Actually, I think I found that through Winch's site. That's kind of an interesting interpretation. Sort of reminds me a lot of the Marshall class and the Bonaventure from the Spaceflight Chronology. Sort of all coupled together. And on the right, we've got something by Rob Caswell. So I put his name up there. Rob Caswell is mostly known, at least to me, for doing a bunch of stuff for Traveler back in the day, Traveler and Mega Traveler. But Alan Steele wrote this novella. It's like 96 pages long, that not only has the shuttle, but apparently it also has the main ship is in it also. I have not read it. I don't own a copy of it. But apparently it's a shuttle coming from that ship, and it's aliens. So there was no references to whether it glowed in the dark, but maybe it does. Okay, so let's take a look at some drawings. These are from two different sources. I forget where they are. The left one I got from Pinterest, and that is a nice drawing of the shuttle. Like that a lot. The one on the right-hand side is these mural blueprints it was from Hungry Lizard Studios, and it's gone. I couldn't find it anywhere. That is the highest resolution image I could find. And it's just the thumbnail from Winch's site. And so I wasn't able to find anything better. But that used to be, you used to be able to just buy that as a poster. And it's just gone. I want to say that I think that maybe it even had some internals, because I'm almost positive I've seen internals for this ship, an internal layout, but I can't find it anywhere. At some point, I'm going to get my old computer up and running again. It's still in a box in the guest room. Once I get that up and running, I'll go looking for it, but I'm not quite there yet. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the drawings that Winch did. So Winch has done a bunch of Blender models and stuff like that, and this is just basically, he describes this as the crude blueprints that he did just from sort of like exporting or taking images of the various 3D models that he did. And as you can see, the one on the left does not have the cowlings. It shows the structure of the things within those cowlings that some of the model kits have. My model kit did not have, but I think the other ones did. And gives you an idea of exactly how big that hangar bay is, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the first of the Winch drawings, but Winch has done some other stuff. For instance, he did this drawing where he hypothesizes, and this is really fascinating. He hypothesizes that there's a laser in this, and that basically that hatch in the top that's in front of the hangar bay is right over a fusion reactor, and you've got this long lasing tube. And the thing about a lasing tube like that is the laser can come out of either end. And so his hypothesis is that it's inertial confinement fusion for the reactor, which is the one where the laser hits the fusion pellet from all the different sizes and blows off the outer shell of it, which compresses the fusion fuel and causes fusion to exist. So his hypothesis is there's a beam splitter that goes back to the reactor and sets that off. And then in the other direction, there's a turret at the front, so they can point the laser where they need to do it. So it's a spinal mount laser with the lasing rod running the length of the neck, and a turret on one end and a fusion reactor on the other end, and with a door right above the fusion reactor so that if you need to dump the reactor, you can dump the reactor just in case. Now, I don't know why you'd need to dump the reactor, because you turn it off and it stops fusing. It's not like a nuclear reactor where you can be in a situation where you can't turn it off, but okay, whatever. He did some scaling work, and I think he pulled these numbers off of somebody else's blueprint. Approximately 547 feet long, with a deck spacing based upon those windows of about 12 feet. And the hangar bay being roughly 20 meters by 30 meters by 11 meters. And those proportions aren't quite right, I don't think. But based upon the size of a box I put over, you'll see it in a second when I sort of read the values off, it didn't quite seem to match. But more or less, it works out. Speaking of which, let's take a look about this compared to an Ohio-class submarine. Ohio-class submarine is 560 feet long, so it's just a little bit longer. I didn't measure, I eyeballed it. I just sort of drug it out, so I could be off by a little bit. But, more or less, that's about the size of it. Ohio-class is about 42 feet in diameter. So, the neck of that goes from less than 42 up to a little bit more than 42. And so you kind of get let's see, that would make the width of it about maybe 100 feet-ish wide at its widest point. And that rectangle there, that sort of maroon rectangle, covers the hangar bay. And if it really is 11 meters deep, I just basically took the square that's 20 meters wide, took the square and put it in half. So that's a 10 meter deep, assuming that the other one really is 20 meters. That's a 10 meter deep hangar. So you can see that hangar goes down quite a ways. It doesn't quite line up, though, as you can see, with that bottom row of portholes, which means I'm not quite sure where the floor is, and it seems to me that at some point you'd take steps down coming out of the hangar bay, or you'd take steps down to get into the hangar bay from the top one. Could be wrong on that. Okay, so this is another version I found online. This was on ArtStation. It's just got a little bit more detail. It shows you some of the detail on the inside, which I think maybe some of that came from the etching, the extra part that you can get to sort of put in there, because it's got some ribbing for the inside of the doors there. It's got some stuff on the front, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'll note, those doors are mechanically very simple, which is a good thing, right? Why wouldn't you have like rolling doors? Why wouldn't you have, multi-part doors? Why wouldn't you have all these other things? Because those things like this require maintenance, and if they jam, you're hosed. That is a pretty bulletproof design. It's not particularly elegant, but it is bulletproof. The sliding louvered doors on the back of the Enterprise have the potential to be a maintenance nightmare, especially since they have to form an airtight seal. And so you've got this clamshells that are fitting over each other and they have to seal tightly. Good luck with that. This, I think, has a lot more likelihood of being able to seal tightly. So here's a reimagining of the MacArthur by someone named Paul Lloyd. I look at that back and I go, oh, okay, there's now something that kind of looks like an engine. Although it's got weird, if I remember correctly, they were just using fusion engines, right? There's a reason why rocket exhaust bells are circular. And the size is not arbitrary on things like that. And so now there's this vague recollection that I have that it might be the case that they use some sort of aerospike drive, which might make sense and would be entirely consistent for this era. Like they use mechanical counterpressure spacesuits. The spacesuits didn't inflate. The spacesuits were basically super duper spandex, and they held you in place with mechanical pressure, not with atmospheric pressure. At one point, Blaine Roderick pulls out his computer and he scribbles an equation across the computer and tells it to solve the equation. In 1974, which was a big deal, but Xerox PARC had already started down that path of handwriting as a method of communicating with computers. These days, you wouldn't think anything of it, but in 1974, that was fantastic. When I first noticed that, which was during the second time I read the book back in the 1990s, I stopped and went, oh my God, he invented the Palm Pilot, because I pulled out my Palm Pilot at the time. He invented the Palm Pilot. And then I discovered he had visited Xerox PARC back in the day. Anyway, back to this one. This is kind of interesting. It's got a smaller hangar bay. It's got the sort of reimagined rear end where you've got some things that I think are engines, but are still weirdly shaped. You've got a front end that sort of balloons out some and gives you some extra space. That long neck always struck me as being space inefficient the way it was. This is a lot more space efficient. I kind of like this. I'd like to see more on this design. I think it's got a lot of potential. Okay, so I haven't really talked a little bit about the Scout, much about the Scout ship so far, but here's the Scout ship. This is the version from Ed Holt. It is a 3D printed one, and it's got a little bit of background there that they've developed. On the lower left-hand corner, we see Matt Jeffries' original sketches. And, you know, when I look at this, this kind of looks Klingon, doesn't it? Kind of looks like a D7. The interface between the neck and the main body looks very much like the D7. You know, if you told me this was a Klingon shuttle, I would totally and completely believe it. It totally and completely looks Klingon. So I've always thought it was kind of that it was kind of nifty. And like I said, I need to get a Scout ship. I need to get a bigger Scout ship. So what's this thing look like on the ground? So somebody decided that they liked the idea of it being on the ground, and they 3D printed a bunch of little small vehicles, including one that is clearly the Arc 2 Arc from the Saturday morning TV show. You've got the Land Raider, Land Destroyer, whatever the thing was from Damnation Alley. which is coming out of the back ramp there. You've got a bunch of stuff that could come out of that back ramp, and that would kind of make sense as to why that door was there. That's where the big vehicle comes from. There's a lot of artwork on the winch's site that shows it coming out of a hatch in the neck, which just doesn't make any sense to me. This makes a lot more sense to me. And on the right-hand side, we've got something from the same artist who did all the other stuff for the Empire of Man, Dennis Antinori, using a Paul Lloyd CG model. But this is what it looks, the MacArthur looked like coming in for a landing. So I'd probably want to have a couple of more rockets there, because it seems to me that if you have a thruster failure of some sort, maybe for battle damage, you probably want a little bit more redundancy than that. But that gives you an idea of what it looks like with landing gear. The model on the left clearly doesn't have landing gear, and it sort of implies that maybe you land on those skids, that skid-like structure underneath. Okay, makes sense to me. This is a Star Trek one from something called the Oakland Navy Yards, Naval Yards. There's the Starfleet Technical Summary, Oakland Naval Yards. It's an 80-page full-color book, and it's basically the drawings of all the models that this guy has kit bashed. And I've ordered it. I just ordered it today. I won't get it. It was through Lulu, so they have to actually print it and then send it to me. And once I got a copy in hand, I'm going to, I think, ask John Payne if I can get the PDF of it. But this is a variation, a Star Trek variation of it. With it's got 4 holds there. It's got impulse units. It's got warp units. It's got a dish sort of slapped on there. That's a very Star Trek thing. Totally makes sense considering that it's Matt Jeffries. So that I liked a lot. I also like these other ones. Oh, here's a picture from the book. This is from his website, and sort of this is the display in the book. I also like these other ones. Somebody apparently is going back and doing CGI work to redo the animated series with more modern CGI, and so that's one of the ships there, the SS Bonaventure. And so that's kind of a nifty looking design. And then on the right hand side, you've got something that looks a lot just like the typical LEIF Ericson, but with Star Trek livery on it, sort of aimed as a pre-TOS era ship. But one of the things I noticed is that if you look at the back, you can see that he's turned part of that rear hull structure into impulse engines, it appears to be. And so the implication is the warp engines are on the side and you've got the impulse engines in the back. And so I kind of like that as a design. And that is my last slide. So with that in mind, let's go back and go through the comments. And I don't see a whole lot of comments so far. Hello to all the usual suspects. I see Bob, I see Wright, I see Merle. I see Hermano. I see my brother Delon. One Horse Shay. Okay. For it to rotate that way for gravity, the conning tower has to be bottom of the ship. Yeah. So the idea would be that when it's rotating, it goes to the outside. You're thrown in that direction, which, it makes sense that you'd probably be that way all the time. If you go back to all the way to the back to here, you can see he put the conning tower down below. There's other artwork too. This isn't just that the ship is upside down. There's other artwork too that make it clear that that's the bottom of the ship. And he put the conning tower underneath. And that actually kind of reminds me of how if things are set up on the Prometheus from Aliens Prometheus. I really like that idea that for a ship where the one time you might need to be able to look out a window and see things is taking off and landing. And for that, you probably want to be on the bottom of the ship because you can actually see stuff from the bottom of the ship. Just like helicopters all have the windows down low so that they can look down by their feet and see out. That's the equivalent of that for a ship like this. In terms of it rotating for gravity, I just don't think that makes sense. I don't think that at 547 feet, I don't think the ship is big enough. It could very well be that it doesn't say this, but it could very well be that Niven and Pournelle rescaled the ship to something bigger. But even so, that's not the best way to get spin gravity. It just doesn't seem to work very well. Yeah, maybe it's a maintenance hatch so you can swap out the fusion reactor during major refits overhauls. That's what Bob says, and that makes total sense to me. He's talking about that hatch over the reactor there. And so, yeah, that totally makes sense to me. In fact, if you go back and you look at all the stuff that Andy Probert did for Star Trek Enterprise, it's clear that they were able to, they were thinking about how you get the warp core out. And this is one of the reasons why I am a big believer in the idea that Franz Joseph is wrong in the Star Trek blueprints that he did. I think that warp core is directly, for that Enterprise, is directly along the center line, and it is specifically designed to come out through the hangar bay. I think the hangar bay is where it is because a horizontal warp core would come out through the hangar bay. Tolling completely makes sense to me. And you need to be able to get to stuff like that, right? You need to be able to do stuff like that. For modern ships, frequently, like if you needed to replace a gas turbine, you go in through the stack. And I don't know what you have to do to get in through the stack, but they know how they would get stuff in and out of the ship if they had to move something really big in and out of the ship. One Horse Shade talks about Enterprise style impulse engines. Yeah, and that last one. And hello, Claude. Okay, so I'm not seeing a whole lot of other comments. It's a shame that Lissa isn't here because it looks like this is the show where we might actually finish under an hour. So if anybody has any other questions, comments, concerns, now's the time to go ahead and ask. Yeah, Delon says gasp. So, yeah, because I don't think we've ever finished early, and I kind of raced through this stuff. Let's see if I've got any more comments. Let me take a look real quick and think about whether there's anything else I have to say. That nose cone thing, I've never been able to sort of figure out exactly what that nose cone is for. Like, why does that exist? Other than maybe, it's armor of some sort around the like a laser emitter or something like that, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me that it would look like that. I don't get it. It's cool, don't get me wrong. I think it looks cool. I can't explain what it's for. Sensors maybe, but I don't know why that you'd need something that was that shape to make sensors work. I really kind of like the wings going forward like that. I think that's kind of a cool look. I don't know why they didn't do that. Let's see, nothing about that. Nothing about that. About that. Okay. All right. I think we are done. But the one thing I will say, let me go back to reemphasize something I was saying earlier, which is you should go to Atomic Rockets and look at Winchell Chung's pages on this, because he goes into a lot of detail about all the different versions of this. Like, somebody did a model rocket version of this ship, which I decided not to include. There's other people that have done other reimaginings of the MacArthur, where they took off the fins and did stuff like that, but they sort of kept some of the design elements of the LEIF Ericson as sort of an homage back to the original version. There's lots of other things that are on Winch's site, and if you're not a fan of Winch's site, yeah, One Horse Shay says Atomic Rockets is a fantastic site. It really, really is. It really, really is. The writers of The Expanse had basically said the only reason The Expanse exists is that they had Winch's site to go and draw from. So good for Winch. And Winch has been working on it forever and ever and ever, and still making updates. Last I checked. And at some point, I'm going to have a role in that. So, but with that in mind, I think it's time to sort of go ahead and declare victory. So thank you very much. As always, I am honored and somewhat flabbergasted that there's a bunch of you that have decided that you want to spend your Saturday evening listening to me talk about stuff. I will be back next week. That is the current plan. I think I'm going to be talking about Alderson point type drives and the implications of that. To give you a little preview, you can have an argument about whether there's stealth in space or not. In fact, at some point, I'm going to do an episode on stealth in space, because Andy Presby has convinced me that the conventional wisdom that there is no stealth in space is at best highly dependent upon a particular set of assumptions. I'll note he's a physicist who works for NASA. He's an engineer who works for NASA, but his undergraduate degree is in physics. But you don't have stealth in space if you know exactly where they're coming out, right? Like, you can't sneak. If you're going through the Panama Canal, they know where you are when you come out of the Panama Canal. And if they're waiting for you when you come out of the Panama Canal, they've got you. And so when you have that conversation about stealth in space, it entirely changes if you're talking about something like that. So that's what I want to get into, and that's going to, at some point, I want to do a larger discussion about the effect of borders in science fiction, and how space drives and borders and all of this stuff that are interact. At some point, I need to go back. I think I've talked about this in a past show a long time, like 100 and some episodes ago. So I need to go back and sort of see what I've said before. But I've always wanted to go back to that topic. I've always wanted to spend some time on that topic, because the subject of borders is really, really interesting. And how you set up your space drive determines how you set up borders. And that in turn decides everything about strategy, about tactics, about what you need your technology to do, et cetera, et cetera. If your jump drive, your FTL drive lets you go from any place to any place, you don't have fortified frontiers. Basically, every planet becomes a walled city-state. And so the discussion about Alderson Point / Starfire warp points, et cetera, is sort of the beginning of a much longer discussion about those sorts of issues. So that having been said, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.